Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first ever webinar in the LEADAg Industry Insight series. We're so glad to have you all join us this afternoon. I'm Meg McCosker. I'm the Ag Workforce Officer for Schutt, which is a local non-for-profit organisation that works to advance rural communities here in Emerald, Queensland. Where LEADAg came from was we ran the first ever LEADAg education program, and as a result, we've developed this webinar series to continue the knowledge and skills shares from industry mentors to young people wanting to learn more about this endless career pathways available. So before I introduce our mentors for today, there are a few housekeeping rules. So Sam will be our first presenter, followed by Karen. They will do their presentations, and we have allocated time at the end of the presentation for questions. There is a chat box function, so for any burning questions throughout, please put your questions in there so you don't forget them. And we will ask them during the question part, or if they work in through the discussion, we'll ask them throughout as well. To reduce interruption and feedback, I've muted everyone apart from our presenters today. And we do ask, if possible, if you could please have your videos on, because it's always nice to look at faces rather than a blank screen. I will also be recording today's webinar, so students that aren't able to attend this afternoon are still able to watch afterwards. And finally, there is no such thing as a silly question. It is highly likely if you're thinking it, someone else is also thinking it, so please just ask away. Our presenters have also finally taken the time to be here today to share their knowledge and expertise and experiences in the industry. So please take full advantage of that and ask as many questions as possible. So this afternoon, our first guest is Sam Fryer. Sam is a grazier in the Flinders Shire, as well as the Northern Accounts Manager for Black Box Co., which is a livestock data analytics company. I will let Sam go into depth about and provide more information about himself, how he got into the industry, what his job entails day to day, and any advice he has for young people coming into ag. All yours, Sam.
Thank you. And don't worry about silly questions. I'll definitely back that up. I'm very good at asking them, and they're kind of you get the best answers. So at the end of this, don't be afraid to fire away. So my name's Sam Fryer. I am born and raised in North Queensland, outside of Hughenden. Grew up on a family property out here. We moved here pretty old the year I was born. So it's been great. I've pretty much my whole life on this place, and I love it. So that was pretty my introduction into the beef industry as such, right from the ground up, from being run around doing waters with my mum and dad, to mustering on and getting tied up to trees whenever the mob would go bush. So which is always good fun when you're a little fella. Once I pretty well finished school, I went to school down in Brisbane, got sent away. Mum and dad needed a break. I went up north. I chased a few cows in the Gulf, which is great fun, and definitely something I'd highly recommend doing. I think there's a real lack in the industry these days for on-ground experience, and it's definitely something that's benefited me as my years have gone along, having that first-hand experience of how cattle stations work and getting away from home and experiencing that. So I spent a few years working in the Gulf on a station called Boomerang Station for a manager called Fred Shepherd, and not only did I grow up, I got a wealth of experience there on cattle handling, right through to actually the running of a station. He was very, very happy to share his experience and wisdom, which is a great thing to do firsthand. After I finished up there, I actually spent a bit of time being a postie. It's a good story, and I believe you should always see something different and don't be afraid to do something different. So for 6 months, I was a postie in Townsville, following the love of my life, which I married, so that turned out well. But I went from being a postie in Townsville, we finished up and we actually got a gig working on a block in the Territory, which was a pretty massive experience going across, I suppose, from a medium operation I'd call home here to like something, well, Helen Springs is about 2 million acres and runs about 66,000 head of cattle. Went from there to working a camp pretty well over there. The head stockman broke his arm and I got thrown in the deep end, which was good. Another good learning experience. And it was one of those times in my life we had a workplace accident at Helen Springs when I first was there, and it pretty well opened my eyes, I suppose, to safety in the workplace and also mental health in the workplace. I think especially when you're isolated in those situations, it's very hard to manage in some situations. In that, like I was running a camp and we were a very young team at the time, and going through a tragedy such as that, it was quite difficult, and I wish we had a bit more support than what we did. And I think these days going forward, it's been 10 years now since that accident, and I think these days people are more open to mental health conversations, and especially in the workplace conversations that happen. I know for myself, I was only young. I was only in my early 20s, and dealing with something like that, along with a team of 18-year-olds, it was a very, very steep learning curve into not only managing a team, but also, I suppose, managing people's mental health and health and safety in general. Once I finished up Helen Springs, come back for a while at home, straight into a great drought for 8 years, and nothing like a bit of experience that is too. So it's never ending. I keep saying experience, but I think life's about that. I think it's never ending learning. I think you've got to, everything you do, you've got to be open, ask questions, and keep on trying to learn. I went down, worked for Elders for a bit down south in Roma, in Elders sale yard, Roma sale yards there, which is pretty cool. One of the largest selling complexes in Queensland. A lot of talking to clients, drafting cattle, lining them up, setting them up for, I suppose I was drafting with the lots right through into sorting out all the paperwork for that, managing clients and bringing their cattle in, auctions plus. It was pretty cool to see the other side and how I've always thought about being an agent, and I tried it out for a bit, and I realised I did like to go home, and I didn't want to stay up late on a phone call. And I think experience of being an agent, you kind of get a phone call anywhere from about 4:30 in the morning to about 10 o'clock at night in the same day. So it was one of those things where you've always got to be available. And then I pretty well come back home, started to work through some succession, which is always fun. And in that time, we're not quite big enough to have two families operating. So my wife and I have always been doing outside work. We've started off with a fair bit of contracting and working around the area. I was lucky enough to be part of Advancing Beef Leaders program with Sammy Cobb. I see her sneaking in the background there, and which is a great experience and a great way to really broaden my mind and what there is available in the industry. I was someone who, obviously, as you can tell, I've worked a lot on different stations, on ground experience and I never really knew the bigger picture as much. And I think Advancing Beef Leaders was a great opportunity for me to get that better insight into the industry. And once you start doing that, it also opens up more opportunities. And I was lucky enough to get given an opportunity to work for Black Box Co., which is a data analytic company, which I've worked for these guys now for over a year and a half. Very much ag tech stage when I first signed up. It was only 6 months old, very early days. And we've gone through the trial phase and now we've been commercial for 5 months now, which is kind of seen development of a business through the early stage where a lot of ag tech companies usually fail and flounder. We've actually come through that pretty strong. So it's been really interesting time of my life, I suppose, taking this last year and a half. But yeah, so I pretty well did a quick overview because I don't like talking about myself, but I'm happy for any questions. I'm open to anything. So if you guys have anything from mental health, being involved, pathway programs from ABL, I just won the Rising Champions for Queensland too, as well. So which was a pretty cool experience. So if you guys got anything like that, from policy right down to on ground, I'm happy to answer. So no question is silly. Fire away.
It's always hard to start the questions off, so I've got one for you, Sam. So what is Black Box and why is data collection so important?
Yep. So Black Box Co. is a data analytic company. So pretty well in the beef industry, a lot of data and information is actually collected, whether that's producers on crush side systems like fertility, either fertility information, fetal aging, weights, date of births that come through, lactation statuses. Like a lot of this information is actually collected right through the growing weights and feedback you get from feedlots. Meatworks, and I know that Karen's going to dig into the genomic side and a lot of that side as well. So there's a massive amount of information that gets collected. It just probably doesn't get utilized enough. So the co-founders, Shannon and Emma, come up with Black Box Co. And what we do is that we collect that information, we clean the data that gets, and we put it up into interactive dashboards. So it's a good way to see an insight to how the herd's going from very start to the end. Yeah, so it's, I suppose these days, and you'll see it, I've kind of gone through the phase when I started working on stations, is that there was no data collection happening. And right now you see a lot of companies and stuff like that, they'll be running a tier side of a stock book or true test device, and right up a lot of these northern blocks and stuff like that are running that on the crush side systems that are become very prominent right across the industry.
Excellent. Katrina's put a question in the chat box. What subjects did you study at school?
Katrina, I'm a late bloomer. I'm not going to claim I did very well at school. I to tell you open and honestly, Chatham House rules. I had a bit of a tough time at schooling period. I just lost my sister before I went to boarding school, and I kind of took a bit of a rough old path through boarding school. Went from a school of 3 to 10 of us up here at Prairie State School to 1,500 down in Brisbane. And not only that, being sent away, I had a really tough time adjusting down there, and I really took me a while to get my wheels underneath me, I would say. I studied nothing too major, but currently at the moment I'm wrapping up a Bachelor of Agribusiness, majoring in marketing and management. So I finish up that this year. So I definitely say to that, a lot of people kind of finish school, they go out and either do uni or do a gap year. Well, that was the case in my year. I kind of did the opposite. I went out and worked on stations up north, and I did a horse course first, and I worked on stations up north. And I wouldn't be too scared, I suppose advice, I wouldn't be too afraid of not finding your feet straight away. We're very lucky you can do stuff from home these days. Like I have full-time gig, and I've studied at night times to wrap up my degree. And yeah, I love being on station, being on part of on ground, but it's definitely, I've used my degree to open a few doors and where I've headed now.
Very good. Was it hard to study being on a station and not doing it the conventional way of going to uni for 4 years?
I have, yeah, it probably depends on the personality. I'm a very driven person. I'm someone who's very task oriented. Like I can set myself tasks and get them done. But the only other thing, I've also had 3 kids during this time. So when I started uni, I had 1 6-month-old daughter, and now I have 3 children. So it's been pretty flat out. But I think you've got to really pick your times. Like, you know, I'm very diligent. Like at home, we get the kids to bed, and by about 8:30, I start studying. Try and do an hour a night when it's flat out, and I only do it part time, just chip away. And I've only got 1 topic left, so pretty happy about that. Going through what we have, yeah, it wasn't hard for me, but then yeah, like I said, I'm pretty focused type of person.
Excellent. Sounds like it. Lots of dedication goes into that. Cooper has put into the chat, what is the best way to get into the cattle industry to running your own property and business without inheriting it or it being passed down?
Well, Cooper, if you have that answer, mate, you can jump on either AgForce or Cattle Council Australia and work on some policy, because it is definitely something that is a topic coming back from Canberra that we discuss pretty heavily up the Rising Champions right across from Tasmania, South Australia, New South Wales. Everyone brought this topic up, a way to try and incentivize, you know, without that backing that comes in. I suppose I'm in a very fortunate position myself here, even though we're not big enough for me to come home, work full time. We're big enough that, you know, I have an opportunity to come back. But in terms of getting into the beef industry, it's a pretty open and on like open industry. Once you start asking questions, you know, I've always believed you do the right thing, no matter what, and you work hard, good things will come back to you. And I've been pretty lucky in that respect, where I've just tried to do the right thing, and I've asked a bucket load of questions, driven everyone nuts by asking them. But at the same time, I've got some amazing answers, and you'll start finding out that you'll meet people along the way that will actually reach out a hand and help you. No question's a silly question, and really, if you are wanting help and guidance, there's always going to be someone there. In terms of owning your own property, that is definitely a tough one. Start just building equity, whether that be trying to just lease, to run, like start slowly building cattle numbers as well. And then, mate, it's just a slog, but it's great fun. It's enjoyable. You wouldn't want to do anything else, and there's nothing like a adjusting country. But yeah, it's a bit of a long haul. But if you've got the long-term goal there, you will achieve it.
Definitely. Does it help working in the industry for a period of time prior to trying to get in and running your own business or owning your own livestock or block?
Yeah, definitely. It just amazes me these days. We're finding, I suppose, around our way is that because of the lack of people coming back in the industry, we're finding a lot of people coming straight out and charging, like going contracting and stuff like that with inexperience. And this is where accidents start to happen. You know, they don't know how to be around cattle, work cattle, anything like that. So I would, you know, there's a range of opportunities, and I just finished listening to a podcast, Anna Spear, on Humans of Agriculture there, and she was talking about, you know, first going out and working on blocks in the territory and stuff like that. And no matter what, you'll find that throughout the industry, right from the bottom to the top, no matter where or what you want to do, that on-ground experience, first-hand experience once you leave school is one of the best things you can do and carry forward. And it also is a great way to network and make a connection to someone if you've worked somewhere. They love a conversation, like they love drawing it back to, you know, when they used to go ringing in the territory or something. Like, you know, it's a great way, and I definitely encourage everyone who wants to go to the beef industry or looking, no matter what you want to do, whether it's agribusiness, to just go out and do a year or two, just do it, just experience what it's like on the ground, because there's nothing like it working in a stock camp.
How do you get into that? Because we do have, I know we've got some students on here today that are from like the city background and don't necessarily have ties in ag. What's the best way to get into the industry up north and things like that?
Start asking questions about, I suppose, what companies are doing what. Like you don't want to just go put your, like everyone's chasing employees. You got no worry getting a job working on a station these days at the moment. So, but don't rush into the first one. Pick and choose a little bit, because you want to make sure you go to a good station with a good manager and a good head stockman. You know, so a manager has been there for a while, head stockman has been there for a while. One, that always leads to a settled camp, which is a lot easier to work with. Two, that on-ground experience there, he won't be just fitting in himself, like finding his own feet. He'll actually have time to give back. And and three, usually they surround themselves with other, you know, like-minded people, and they have a good reputation. So before you do say yes to everything, ring around. Not, yeah, I suppose the companies, yeah, focus on companies, but just focus on the managers. Focus on the managers and first up, and trying to get an insight and pick the brains of whoever. If you know someone from up north, or, you know, just talk to them, ask them questions, and yeah, don't just say yes to the first job, because it's easy enough getting a job. You just want a good one.
Is it easy if you do go to the, like, I don't want to say like the wrong camp, but if you don't end up in the most ideal location, is it easy to move around once you're up there?
Yeah, it's not as it's not the wild west that everyone makes out to be. It's you know, we're pretty civilized, us northern folk, but it's good, and usually you work out pretty quick. I was talking to someone the other day who went to a camp, didn't quite enjoy it, and she only lasted a month or two, but then found her feet and was there for 2 years. So don't be afraid to shift around, but at the same time, saying that, you need to commit. Like you do find they do talk about like that honeymoon period at the start, and it happens a couple months in. No matter what job you have, you'll hit this spot where the honeymoon's over, and, you know, the rubber hits the road, and, you know, you kind of, that grit to get through that, you know, will set you up. So don't just float around, but at the same time, you'll know pretty quick if it's not a good camp. But yeah.
Let's change speed a little bit. You spoke about getting thrown in the deep end and managing teams, and how important it is to think about your team's mental health. Can you touch a bit more on that, please?
Yeah, definitely. So probably something I've got to come to recently, last couple of years, after being through my mental health struggles. And it's probably something that isn't talked about as much. I suppose it wasn't talked about as much a couple of years ago. Now it's very prominent, which is great to see. So it opens up a lot of conversations. But in terms of, no matter where you are, I think personally you got to focus on yourself when it comes to mental health or physical health. So make sure you do set some time away, no matter how busy you are. Try and set some time to yourself, whether that's meditating, yoga, working out, going for a walk, reading a book, whatever you do. Try and focus on yourself. You will find, well, I find anyway, I kind of stack on a bit too much. I'm always chasing one thing after another. Make sure you do set some time in your day to relax and just walk or work out and burn out something and focus on yourself. Because if you don't focus on yourself, what happens is that you'll break down and you will end up not performing at your best. And that's what I definitely found that happened in the territory there, is that we kind of got caught up in a cycle where we weren't focusing on ourselves. We didn't take the time to recover from the incident, and we definitely ended up burning ourselves out that year. And especially when it comes to a team, it's definitely noticing the small things. You've got to be aware of the team. You can't, being a leader in a team, it's very much not so. You're pretty well a people manager most of the time. It's more about that, managing the people in your team, than actually focusing on the job so much. Especially when you've got a team of 8 and they're all under 18 and all under 20, and a lot of the time there's usual things that go on in teenage life. We've all been there. So it's usually managing those people and the personalities and working with them, and realizing that sometimes some people might need a break themselves. So, asking if they're okay. And don't put them in situations that they aren't qualified or that that their experience can't handle, because that's definitely when you get people hurt.
You raised a good point there of working with different personalities. Do you have any advice for people coming into the industry and working with different personalities, especially in stock camps and things like that?
You'll meet them all. No. Oh, geez. It's a tough one. I think doing a disc profile, and getting to understand yourself is probably the best thing. When I said disc profile, Myers-Briggs or whatever you want to do, get an understanding of yourself and where you sit. Because then I think you'll definitely understand how you communicate with other people is probably a big one, especially when it starts working in a team. Way people communicate is sometimes perceived differently between themselves. It's just patience, really. And it's having that bit of understanding from somewhere else. When you're sitting, having long days and tempers start to fray. In the end, it is working with personalities and learning to manage that. Even right up to now, dealing with what I do now, like running a lot of our clients, there's totally different personalities. You work out when some people want to talk on a phone, some people want to email, some people want to text. Some people want to have our chat on exactly what their dashboard's doing and what their data looks like. Some people are quite happy just to get it set up and run. So you've really got to kind of learn to work with people. I'd definitely tell anyone that I'm not that good at it, but I try my best and just keep learning and keep working with people to kind of learn to work with people. And there's a range of courses out there that you can do, and I highly recommend doing them.
Do you have any other advice that you would like to give the people young people coming into ag? Such as doing disc profiles?
There's lots. It's a great opportunity. I think don't be afraid to put your hand up. I think coming from my background's probably a bit different. I'm definitely a bit of a black sheep around our area. I've kind of done things a bit differently, and don't be afraid to do that. Go out and beat your own path a bit. And when opportunities do come, don't be afraid to say yes to them, because you never know when those opportunities will come by again.
That's fantastic. Does anyone have any last questions for Sam before we actually, hold on, I do have another one. Do you have any people that you look up to in the industry that you came across when you were young or even now? Yeah,
definitely. I think back in day, it's always been my father. I think I'll look back early on, but going through, rattle off people like John Arnold when I first left school. He gave me a good tune up when I first left school and put me on the right path. Freddie Shepherd, Majors Boomer, he was great. He was the same thing, a bit of a rogue like me coming out full steam ahead. He kind of pulled me into gear a bit. And then right up to now, I look at people like, I suppose, my mentor, a couple of people I've got now, definitely be like Emma Black, Shannon Spate, like they're the co-founders of Black Box Co. And you kind of, and Ray Thiem would be another one. He's kind of client turned mentor, and someone I kind of bounce a lot of ideas off, who I actually really enjoy conversations that I have. And you keep finding these people that you'll run into, but just just make sure, like, like water finds its own level. So if you look around and you're surrounded by dickheads, you're going to be a dickhead. Like, that's sorry to say it that way, but that's how I got put it. So, but if you want to achieve something in life and you want to move forward, surround yourself with people that are stepping forward, having a crack. If you want to become someone who's going to go towards uni or run your own property or own your own property, surround yourself with people that own properties or have gone through that process. Don't hang around the ones who you'll meet them in life who'll sit there going, oh, I can't do it. It's too hard. Surround yourself with the fellas or ladies who are out there adjusting, leasing, having a crack. And you'll find that you'll start achieving your goals when you surround yourself with those people.
There's one thing I've noticed in the industry is everyone's very willing to help out and accommodate where possible. And we see that today with you and Karen joining us to just talk about your experiences in the industry. And we're very, very thankful. So thank you so much, Sam, for joining us. I think with that, unless we have any last minute burning questions, we might wrap up Sam's portion of the chat. And if you do have any questions throughout Karen's that it sparks your memory and you want to ask Sam, please put them in the chat because you'll stick around, I assume, Sam, till the end.
Yeah, definitely. And anyone, I'm happy for you guys to contact me. I'm pretty open. You can find me on LinkedIn, or like you've got my contact there. I think you can share it out to anyone who wants to chat about anything. I'm happy to have a chat. So no, thank you very much for having me on board.
Excellent, will do. Thank you so much. So our second guest for today is Karen Schutt. Karen was raised on cattle stations in central Queensland, and her passion and love for ag led her to complete her Bachelor of Applied Science in Rural Technology and then on to her PhD in quantitative genetics. She uses this knowledge as a research and development manager with a focus on livestock genetics for Neogen Australasia. She has a very diverse history within the industry, so I'll pass it over to Karen to provide some more insight. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Meg. I did have some slides for today, but I'm just wondering whether there may be not enough bandwidth with where some of the participants are. So I might just, talk if that's okay, as Sam did. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, as Meg mentioned, I grew up in central Queensland on cattle stations. So, that was my background. I was like pretty much every other bush kid, just free range. I did distance education. So the other two kids in my classroom were my two brothers, and we all ended up at boarding school. So a pretty typical sort of story, for a bush kid. The only careers I had come in contact with in my younger years pretty much were what my family did, other cattle producers. Most of my friends at boarding school, I went to boarding school in Rockhampton. Most of my friends, also came from agricultural families. So I hadn't had a lot of exposure to other potential careers. When I finished school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. At 15, I was wanting to leave school and be a Jillaroo. That was my, my goal. And fortunately, my father said to me, "Look, sooner you finish school, and then go and be a Jillaroo." So I continued on, finished year 12, was still keen on being a Jillaroo. And Dad said, well, you know what, maybe it might be worthwhile going and doing something before you come back to the land, some type of course, a trade or a degree, just some other training that you can fall back on, later in life if you need it. So I thought about what I wanted to do. I had been to a summer school at the end of year 11 at the University of Queensland Gatton campus. And that was just a week-long summer school where, some of the lecturers there gave us some introduction information on the types of courses that were offered. And there was a lot of young people my age. So it was a lot of fun. And it was probably the first exposure I had to, degrees, diplomas, that type of thing. So I thought a bit about that, but even when I finished year 12, I wasn't 100% committed. So, back when I finished school, gap years didn't really exist, but that's basically what I did. I took a gap year, but I didn't head out west. I actually went and lived in Brisbane. I worked for a vet part-time because I was interested in animals and vet science. I pretty much had a year just working and thinking about what I wanted to do. Towards the end of that year, I went to a careers market at the University of Queensland at the St Lucia campus. And I had a chat to, a bunch of people on the stalls about what they did. And I still remember one of the people I spoke to was a lecturer at Gatton College. And I said to him, look, I'm interested in animal breeding and genetics and reproduction. And he said, well, look, we've got a degree called rural technology that I think would suit you. So I enrolled in that. It was a 4-year degree, and it was honestly the best 4 years of my life. It was just so much fun. It was like being at boarding school. I went to an all-girls boarding school with boys. And, there were dozens and dozens of us from all over the country. So it was very, very social. We did do a little bit of work in between. By the end of 4 years there, I graduated with my degree. I also graduated with honours, which, was a bit of a surprise to me. But I think, because I wasn't necessarily the best student, but I think that just reflected how much I enjoyed what I was doing and how it fitted with, what I liked learning about and the potential career that I would have. So also while I was at college, in fact, during my first week at university, I met my husband at a keg party. So, so that, altered the course a little in that, that whole thought of finishing college and heading off into the, to the world and going anywhere I wanted. And we did do that for a little while. We got married pretty much 2 weeks after I graduated. And we went to the US and we were over there for 5 months. We worked on a ranch in Kansas. And that was a really great experience because we got to travel. We had a really great boss who was a family friend. So we got to travel. We worked. And then after a while, we also went and went to the UK and did a bit of a trip around there. But eventually, we were young and we ran out of money and we needed to come home and actually earn a living. So we ended up on the family farm at Emerald. And so, of course, coming back to a smaller regional town, opportunities for employment in my particular field of interest, it wasn't probably as great as what it would have been, if I had settled closer to a big city, like Brisbane or somewhere like that. So as it turned out, a job came up as an instructor at Emerald Agricultural College. And so I took on that job. That was my first job. And it was great. I really enjoyed teaching. So I taught agribusiness and livestock production. And you never get to know your subjects better than when you actually have to teach it to someone else. So that was a really great experience. And I really enjoyed, teaching the students there. But, it wasn't long before I was actually looking for more challenge. I loved what I was doing, but I still had an interest in science and research, and I had taken my students to a field day at duck ponds, and it was at the beginning, or relatively close to the beginning, of what was the beef CRC, which was a massive 7-year research project that stretched from Northern Australia all the way down to the south. It involved universities, it involved CSIRO, Department of Ags. So it was a massive project. And what they presented at the field day was just some results from their Northern Crossbreeding project, which was a breeding program they had with Brahman and other breeds. And I thought, gosh, this sounds really great. This is really interesting. And in fact, I went and spoke to my father about it, and he actually embarked on a new breeding program because he had been, we'd started out with straight Brahmins as I was growing up, and then he was looking at crossbreeding, just trying to produce, better beef. And it was from that initial research I went and spoke to him, and he said, well, which breeds, which ones are doing the best for, for marbling and for hot carcass weight and for, a number of other traits that they were looking at. And so that he even started adopting some of this research work, in his own breeding program. So going back to where I was working, I decided to leave the Ag College. I worked briefly as a journalist for Queensland Country Life. Decided that was not one of my strong points, but had a go at it. which was, I guess, the main thing when you're young, and decided that wasn't for me. And, you know, we talked a little bit about, or Sam talked a little bit about, you know, thinking about, you know, what you're wanting to do. And about that time, I actually did what they called the Building Rural Leaders program. So it was offered through Department of Primary Industries. I don't believe they offer it anymore, but it was 6 week-long workshops that ran over 9 months. And we were broken into groups, focus groups, and the focus groups got together in between each of those workshops. And so, you know, we spent a whole week on personality type indicators. So, you know, the Myers-Briggs and you know, how you work in teams. And just what I took away from that was understanding my personality, and also how other people think differently and how they work differently. And that helps you to understand why people may not be on the same track as yourself. Probably the most powerful unit I did, or the most powerful week-long workshop that I did, was on goal setting. And so that was, you know, thinking about, you know, in the future, you know, at the end of your life, what do you want to have achieved? You know, where do you want to be? What do you want? You know, what do you want your family and friends to be saying about you, about the type of life that you've led? And so with that, we set a vision statement, and then we spent, you know, and this, like I said, it went over a week, setting down the goals to get to that point. And one of the goals I wrote down was doing further study. So that pretty much led me back to research. I just literally got on the phone and called the head of the research project that I had been to the field day for. She was based at the Tropical Beef Centre in Rockhampton. Her name was Dr. Heather Burrow. And I just phoned her and said, look, I'm interested in what you're doing. You know, I've got an interest in animal breeding and genetics. I'd really, you know, I'm thinking of maybe doing a master's. You know, is this something that I could work on? And she said, oh, absolutely. We'd love to have you. We've got a postgraduate program. So that was pretty much it. I went down to Armidale. I went to the University of New England, and I did a short course. It was just a 6-month course, but it basically got me up to speed on quantitative genetics. And then from there, with her support and the support of an academic supervisor who had been one of my lecturers in the short course, I applied for a PhD, and I also applied for a scholarship to do that, a 3-year scholarship, and I got that through the CSIRO. So that sort of set me on the path then. I was fortunate that I was able to base myself in Rockhampton at the Tropical Beef Centre. My husband, by that stage, or just shortly after I started my PhD, he moved down, and we ended up living on Belmont Research Station, just north of Rockhampton. So he was involved in you know, some of the data collection for some of the project work that I was doing. But the project literally took me, you know, I'd get in the ute with the genetics technicians and go west. You know, we went up to the Northern Territory, Far North Queensland, Western Queensland, doing all sorts of, you know, fun stuff like ovarian scanning, AI programs, collecting all sorts of data for this project. And then I pretty much got stuck into that for a few years. It was probably 2 years into my PhD that my husband and I talked about starting a family. And I had, you know, I had a really good mentor. Heather Burrow was a fantastic mentor. She was always encouraging me to do, you know, other things. So she said, look, you know, one of my projects was in reproduction, female fertility, and she said, look, we've got some good connections with the US, Ohio State University. Jim Kinder over there's got a really strong animal production group, animal science group. She said, I think we should get you over there and you know, do some study in female fertility. And I said, oh, that'd be great. So, but to get there, of course, it costs money. So I spent a few months, and I applied for several scholarships to get there, and I began to think I wasn't going. So as I said, my husband and I decided to start a family, and I think I was only a few weeks pregnant when 2 scholarships came in, one from MLA and one from the University of New England. It was a research scholarship. So, you know, at 4 months pregnant, I got on a plane and I flew to Columbus, Ohio. I was based there for 3 months. I studied reproductive physiology, endocrinology, which is, you know, the hormone control of reproduction, and genetics with a group over there, which was just a fantastic experience. Scott flew over for a month while I was there, and we travelled and went and visited friends that we had made down in Kansas. So that was lovely. I got to do a bit of travel as well. And then when I finished that winter quarter, it was a winter quarter and it was absolutely freezing. I then flew to the UK. I went to Scotland and visited Roslin Institute, which is where Dolly the sheep was cloned. So, because my supervisor said, if you're going to the US, you may as well get a round the world ticket and visit a few other people. So I had a whole list of researchers that were working on projects similar to what I was doing. So I visited scientists at Roslin Institute, I visited Edinburgh University, then I flew to the Netherlands, which is where my PhD supervisor, academic supervisor came from. And I visited a university there and also the equivalent of our CSIRO. And then I caught a train to Paris and I trained down to Montpellier, and I visited another research institution there and visited scientists. And then I flew home. So I was gone for 14 weeks. It was a fantastic experience. But then, of course, it was, full on trying to write up chapters for my thesis. And, obviously our first daughter came along. And when she was about 6 months old, Scott and I had a chat and thought, we really want to raise our kids the way we were raised, on a property. So we left the research station and went home to my family property at St George in southwest Queensland. So we were based there. Initially, our plan was to be there for 5 years. We were there for 13 years. I did graduate with my PhD. It took me a few years longer than I had anticipated because I kept having to take breaks to have babies. So by the time I graduated, I was pregnant with my fourth child, and it was great. It was quite the accomplishment. I remember at the time thinking, "Gosh, I'm so glad that's over." But I think the beauty of what I did was that you can pretty much do this type of thing from anywhere. I did most of my thesis write-up remotely. I'd drive up to Rockhampton and I'd spend a week up there visiting my supervisor, or I'd drive down to Armidale and spend a week down there. Put the kids into family daycare. I carted them everywhere with me. We lived, an hour from town, so I didn't have, ready access to daycare or anything like that. I didn't have an au pair. My mother and grandmother did a fair bit of babysitting for me. I accessed other resources, remote area frontier services. I was able to get access to some nanny care. I think it was 3 weeks a year. And I used some volunteer services just to help me get through. And so I think I literally handed in my thesis, and a week or two later, I was teaching my eldest daughter distance education. She'd started prep. So life was pretty busy. And in that period of time when I was sort of taking a break to have a family, I still stayed, I was involved with the family business. My husband and I ran commercial cattle on the family property. I stayed in touch with people in my field, in the quantitative genetics field. I continued to be a member of AAABG, which is a genetics group. They meet every 2 years. They have a conference every 2 years. So I stayed in touch with them. I still tried to attend conferences. I did some part-time work as a freelance writer for the Beef Bulletin and one of the Breed Society's publications. So I just tried to stay active. And obviously, being a young mum, got involved in community groups, the Kids Pony Club and the kindy and things like that, school. And so by the time our eldest child got to high school age, Scott and I didn't want to send them to boarding school. So I moved to Toowoomba, which is about 4 hours from where we lived. And we bought a unit, and our eldest daughter went to an all-girls school, but the 3 younger ones went to a Cath Ed just down the road. And when they got to high school, they went off to the same high school that our eldest daughter went to. And so that was about the time I started looking for work again. And so I sent out my resume to the 3 supervisors that I'd had during my PhD and said, look, I'm looking for some part-time work. Let me know if anything comes up. And out of the blue, I got this call from the head of the animal genetics lab at the University of Queensland. And he said, we don't have anything full-time at the moment, but we're looking for casuals. Would you like to come down and work for us? And I went, it was at Gatton. And I said, oh, fantastic. So that's pretty much how I kicked off my career again. I used to drop the kids at school, I'd run down the range, I'd work for 5 or 6 hours, and then I'd race back up the range and pick the kids up. So that's how I got back into genetics. It wasn't the quantitative genetic side of things. It was obviously genetic testing. And then 2 years after I started that job, the University of Queensland Animal Genetics Lab was bought out by Neogen Corporation, which is a large multinational based in the US. So at the time, there was 14 staff in the lab, and we processed about 4,000 samples a month. So, you know, it's almost 5 years on. We've got about 50 employees, and we're processing up to 50,000 samples a month. You know, the growth in genomic testing has been exponential. So, you know, back in the UQ AGL days, we were mostly testing cattle and sheep. Now we test pretty much all species. We're still majority cattle and sheep, and that is for things like parentage testing, genetic defects, and genomic testing that goes into the likes of single-step breed plan. But we also test, you know, for Orovet, for example, who, you know, the genetic tests they do for cats and dogs. We test goats, pigs, chickens, yeah, pretty much all of the livestock species, aquaculture. So once we went into Neogen, I ended up in the R&D side of things. So, you know, a regular day for me is most of my meetings, because we're an international company, most of my meetings are between about 6 a.m. and midday, because we have labs. Our main labs is in the US, but we have labs in Canada, Brazil, Scotland, China, and obviously Australia. So, you know, we end up having, you know, a few international meetings a week, and they're obviously quite early in the morning. Then, you know, there's just attending to emails. I do a lot of product support. So if customers have questions about, you know, particular genetic tests, or if they've been validated in their breed, then I will, that type of question generally comes to me. I'm involved in new product development, things like validating new genetic tests. You know, we had one come up, you know, recently. There was a new genetic defect discovered in Herefords. There was another one just in the last couple of years discovered in Wagyu. So I've been involved with those. And then obviously, you know, the new thing in genomic testing is next generation sequencing. So, you know, working on pretty much the cutting edge of genetics and genomics, which I would never have thought when I was, you know, a school leaver that I could possibly end up here. You know, I've just kind of followed my nose a bit and stuck my head out, I think, and just been a little bit proactive rather than waiting for jobs to pop up. Maybe just making some calls, you know, sending some emails.
Proactive rather than reactive, yeah.
Yeah, and it's surprising where it will take you. So yeah, that's pretty much my story, I guess.
A very interesting story. We've got a question from Bridget, and I've got a couple of questions written down as well. So, was your husband off a property, or did he learn his skills before working at the ranch when you went over to Kansas?
Yeah, so he came from a mixed cattle and farming property at Emerald. So he had a lot of background. You know, he was like most farm kids, you know, working on the farm from you know, pretty much very early on, probably primary school days. So he had a lot of experience. And then he did the same degree I did, but he was in his 4th year when I was in my 1st year. So we sort of had a similar background in that respect.
Yeah. Olivia just sent through, do you know if rural technology courses still offered at UQ, or is there a similar one that is offered?
Yeah, so they don't offer the 4-year degree anymore, unfortunately, but they have cut it, because the 4-year degree used to cover lots of different fields. So, you know, animals, animal production, agronomy, crop production, all sorts of things in the first 2 years. So now they've cut it back to just a 3-year degree in, you know, specialising in one particular field, whether it be the animal production or agronomy or crop production, things like that.
Okay. Jackson has sent through, what would you say the hardest part of getting into the industry is? I guess that's probably, actually, I might put a hold on that, because I've got a couple of questions that I want to ask the both of you. So we'll leave that one for the moment. Laura just sent through, if you want to do cattle genetics and breeding programs and AI, etc., what is the best subjects to do in grade 11 and 12, or uni or TAFE?
Well, my favourite subject at school was biology. I did the 3 sciences. But biology was by far my favourite subject, and I think that is probably the one that's probably most relevant. And then it depends which way you want to go, because I've done a little bit of mentoring, and I've had a similar question. And if you're interested in going down the reproduction side of things, I think the University of Queensland Gatton is a great space, because on that campus, they've got a vet school. They've got some amazing resources there, and people who specialise in the reproduction side of things. Whereas if you're more interested in the breeding and genetics side of things, the quantitative genetics, then probably the likes of the University of New England is probably a better spot, because they've got a really strong quantitative genetics team, and they're right next to the animal genetics and breeding unit, who developed the prediction equations for breed plan. Where the breed societies get their breeding values from.
As someone that is still in school and wanting, like, they know they're interested in genetics but not sure what path to take, do you have any advice on like how to, like, either if it's work experience, or like how to decide between breeding genetics and then quantitative genetics?
Yeah, so for my work experience, I actually when I was at school, I went out to CSIRO, to the Tropical Beef Centre. I don't think that exists there anymore. Central Queensland University, I think, has taken over that building, but I think they still do have, and most universities do have, research groups. So my suggestion would be maybe try and find some, or get some experience, maybe see if there's a research group that comes out of, the likes of, the Central Queensland Uni. Also, there's lots of Upland Central Queensland breeding services that offer, do AI and embryo transfer, things like that. So I'm thinking there's a couple in Rockhampton that spring to mind sort of immediately. Maybe try and get some work experience with them, because that will then, give you that hand, you probably won't get to actually do the hands-on experience yourself, but you'll get to see it firsthand, how those guys work. And I think that would be a really good place to start.
Yeah, and I guess just having a bit of understanding of what really to expect day to day is also a huge thing as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So I've just got a reminder that I've got 5 minutes left. So if you've got any last minute questions, please send them through. But in that 5 minutes, I've got a couple of questions for the both of you. So we'll start off with Jackson's question, which is, what would you say the hardest part of getting into the industry is?
Yeah, look, I guess I followed my nose. I don't actually, and because I came from the industry, I don't know that I found it too hard. I think the hardest thing is just taking that first step, calling someone or making contact with someone, because I think, particularly young people can find that that's a bit of a challenge to just call someone in a position of authority perhaps. But the reality is most people are more than willing to help. They're happy to help the younger generation, give you some advice to how to get started on your career, ask you some questions about, helping you to refine where your interests lie. So yeah, I think that's, and when you say getting into industry, getting into your own property, that's a different thing. So, we talked about that earlier, the cost of, the ability to do that. That was a massive question even when I was first married. How do we get our own property?
Yeah.
We ended up working for family for quite a long time. Now we're out on our own, but it did take a while. It is very difficult.
Yeah, a long slog. Sam?
Yeah, definitely, parents. I think probably the hardest thing being young is reaching out to someone. It's easy enough to get in the industry, but I suppose you want to make sure you're following the right path of what you want to end up or what you want to do. And like I said before, it's just making sure you're talking to the right people, or if you are looking to go on a property or something, or whichever journey, making sure you go to the right place is probably the key thing. Not just saying yes to anything, but making sure you're asking the questions around to you going to a suitable place.
And thinking too about where you want to end up, I think, are you happy just to work, work the land hard jacket, or do you want to do something that's, in one of the service industries, like an agronomist, or or work somewhere like, Department of Primary Industries or somewhere like that, because then obviously that's a slightly different approach in that, you may have to do different type of training for that.
Yeah, very good. We've had a good question come through from it's Semicob's computer, but I'm pretty sure it's her children. Where do you see the future of cattle genomics going? Look, I think it's just I think in all industries, not just cattle, genomics is going to become
more and more the norm. You know, we've just seen exponential growth in the last 5 years, or at least I have, you know, because people want to be able to predict the performance of an animal early in life. And you know, we can do that with genomics. Otherwise, you know, the old way of, you know, looking at an animal and trying to estimate, you know, what it's going to do is not very accurate. So, you know, I think genomics will continue to grow exponentially. I think one of the issues, you know, that a lot of people say to us is, you know, the cost and developing the type of tests and predictions that anybody can use, because, you know, obviously to date, a lot of it has been very heavily specific breed focused, so breed society focused, whereas there's a lot of commercial breeders out there who also want to be able to use these genomics tools.
I must say, like, on top of that, Karen, it's definitely, like, coming from a data angle, is definitely data integrity on the side of things. Like, we're seeing a big push now to eliminate inefficiencies in our industry. Like, you know, we've got some big targets to meet for 2030 carbon neutral. We've got, you know, obviously the big talk right now with like the talk around sheep live export, but, you know, that'll flow into us. So we've got to come better as an industry at what we do and meeting these goals of carbon neutrality, like, you know, environmental factors that are in play. Like, we, not only does genomics play a heavy part, but also, like, you know, the main behind the beef industry is very much a commercial herd that, you know, we've got to get better at producing beef, and that comes down to how well and eliminating those inefficiencies.
And the other side of that as well, I think, is welfare. You know, animal welfare really is at the forefront of a lot of our consumers' minds now. So things like, you know, we've got tests like the horn poll test. We can now, you know, make sure that we don't make 2 carriers for a genetic defect, you know, which is lethal. You know, so it gives us tools to be able to select animals more efficiently and effectively.
Excellent. Okay, very good. So I think we've had some excellent questions today, and I think, Sam, you said it earlier that you'd be happy for people to contact you, and I like what you said earlier, Karen, about being proactive and kind of, you know, if you know what you want to do, you go out and get it. So I'm going to suggest that anyone that's on today, I'm happy to help with connections with Sam and Karen, and I'm sure if you're both happy with that. So if you'd like to speak further with Sam and Karen about anything that we spoke about today, email me. It's meg@chirrup.org.au, but you should all have that. If not, I will send out an email afterwards. Yeah, so I think we will wrap up because it's 5 o'clock on the dot. So I'd like to say a huge thank you to both Sam and Karen for joining us today and sharing their experience and knowledge with us all. I hope you've all learned a lot from today's discussion, and it has at least helped you in your career direction within the ag industry. Hopefully not made it harder for you. I hope it's helped provided some clarity. We will be continuing this series next term with some new guests, and we're always open to suggestions. So if there's a particular career that you'd like to learn more about, please send it through and we'll keep you up to date. So thanks everyone for joining. Though there was a question about learning more about LEADAg from Jodie Smith. Jodie, I'll be in touch with you directly if that's okay. Or even another way is just to follow the Chirrup Facebook page, because there's a few links on there that's linked to our website, which has information there. Otherwise, yeah, I'll be in contact with you directly. So with all that being said and done, I'd like to thank everyone for joining in today, and yeah, take care.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye.